Well, the only way I think I'm going to be able to get that in there, you got about a, I don't know, it's about a 1/2 inch gap on the bottom, but it's more at the top. I don't know if you can see that. Let me see if I can get you in there. It's more at the top. So when you draw that together, it's going to pull that motor up. Probably pull it up enough to be away from, we're hitting on the front diff just a little bit. Mainly it's sitting on these fittings for that steering rack. So when it pulls it back, that'll have it clear of that, okay? But when you do that, it's going to pull those fuel lines into that firewall right there. And that's going to tighten our gap up right there. Then we got to make sure we got room for our pipe right here on the bottom of the firewall. Kind of looks like it's pushing it together. I don't know if you can see that. See that? It's kind of almost kinking it. So we're going to have to pull the dash out and cut that high. We'll probably just cut it right below that lip and come on around this way, around both sides of that dog box. And that's kind of the game plan. I got to fix the motor puller. We broke the wheel off of it right here. We got to get this beat back together. The wheel finally freed up on it. We'll try to just scab it back together so we can get it together. To get those top bolts in, you know, there's no room, so you're gonna have to make a small dog box. I'll just cut it out for now. Leave the dash out of it, whatever. Leave steering arm or steering column hooked up. We got to pull the dash anyhow to stick this wiring harness back in there, figure out a spot to where it can go in and be kosher. And then you know, once we get it bolted up, get the motor mounts on it, get it to where, you know, nothing's really going to hit, leave a 1/2 inch or whatever. And I might have to trim up some of these wheel wells here to get in there to do something. In the ideal world, you'd have an excavator, you'd unbolt this cab, lift this cab off, get it hooked up, and then just have the dash and interior out to where you could cut that dog box, lower it down on there to where it was free, you know, and then be able to hook everything. Make sure you got enough room to hook everything up. Probably need a like a van style brake booster on it. That's something probably need. You know, I give you a little more room on that side for the intake. Gonna have to get a aftermarket intake universal kit to where we can kind of bring it up here to the front, right through here. Be able to hook up the fuel lines. Probably going to end up using that entire wiring harness, because if it don't have that evap solenoid on it, you know, for the fumes for the gas or whatever with the charcoal canister, it just probably won't run right. You can delete it, but you got to have it tuned. And basically with HP tuners, from what I've read up on, you gotta pay them once a year to have it deleted with the scan tool. And it's got to be through HP tuners too, so that would be a subscription for the vehicle once a year or whatever. And then if it's got to be updated, because some of those updates they're talking about, you know, I'll never delete 4.0, and I guess they got like 5. It goes on and on, okay? Blah, blah, blah. So, a laptop with an MDI face and all that, you know, it's kind of expensive. And that's why I wanted to kind of get rid of all that jazz. Just hook it up the way it came. Use that factory wiring harness from front to back with the motor. I might even have to figure out a way to use that tank. I think there's a lot more fuel with that tank. It fits the hole. Just figure out a way to put that inside of that tank as far as the evap and all that jazz. And then it's got a plug that goes to that tank. In order to keep from having an evap code, it can't have no leaks. So we'll have to figure out something to make all that work. But first things first, we got to get that motor will have to, once you get it bolted up, it's going to pull it up at the top, and there's probably plenty of room after that. It's just you're going to have to get the motor mounts in there to hold it where it's going to be at. And you got to have a way to get to the bolts, okay? You know, they didn't give us a regular style bolt or nut. They give us a Torx bit. So when that draws it together, it's probably 1.5 inches at the top. It fits on the bottom, but 1.5 inches at the top, and it can't go back because of that firewall. Get it out to where you can draw it up without taking the transmission off and sliding it back. It just ain't gonna fit. You know, I don't want to have to redo a bunch of stuff on the cross member, and you know, if it ain't where it's at, it can come up, but it can't just go forward or backwards because of the drive lines. I don't have a slip yoke. I looked at that transfer case. It's just got like a pivoting ball. It ain't got a slip yoke. It might move a little bit, but you know, if you slide it forward, you'll never slide it back enough to get it off of the front diff right there. So whatever it takes to make that happen, to engage the four-wheel drive, you know, I'd like to keep that factory wiring harness in there so we could use the transfer case the way it is. You know, you just hit the button with the other wiring harness. As long as it's got power to it, it'll actuate that actuator. You know, worst comes to worst, we can use the button and just hook it up into the fuse panel and make it to where it's just going to engage that RAM. Eventually, you know, you could have a piece made, if you just had a socket that would go on there with a round bar, you could drill a hole and put a bolt through it to where it would hold that actuator in, and you would have to unscrew it or something. It's nice to be able to turn it off, turn it on kind of thing. If you have it on a button to where you can make the actuator push in and out, that's a better way of doing it. Transfer case, gonna have to get a manual style, whatever. You know, that electric box is junk, but we're gonna have to get one of those little cheap deals to where you just use it as a manual transmission, just like a manual valve body. It just hooks up, you put power to it. It's just got to have a 10 amp fuse, and then it's got a toggle switch for the overdrive for the transmission. Not a big deal. A shorter belt for this and a manual steering rack. I'll probably just put a manual steering rack in it and be good enough. You know, that'll be plenty. Just got to be able to get in there and switch it out. So we'll have to leave a hole in the firewall and just basically get everything to where we can hook it up, and then get a manual rack. I can get a short belt so it'll charge the alternator, but we're going to have to get that bolted up and get enough room to make sure nothing's rubbing or pinching lines off, and then route hoses and all that. That's not a big deal. Next thing's next, we just pull the dash. I'll pull that dash, cut a hole in the firewall, make a dog box that we can just silicone at the top in case you need to pull that out or whatever. We can just either put some bolts, self-tappers in it with some silicone, or whatever we got to do. So I'm dedicated. You know, it's just going to be however long it takes. Probably going to take a while to have it running and driving. And shifting the four-wheel drive and all that, it'll be a while, if I'm being honest. So, we got one part of the puzzle. That was the motor adapter. And then just whatever, once we get that mounted up with motor mounts, we need a manual steering rack, a shorter belt, an adapter for the transmission to make it work, and then the adapter for the transfer case to be able to shift it in and out of gears. We do that and get everything hooked up and start off of a key. Be pretty good. And obviously I've seen Muggs Customs, they were taking, you know, once they just had a motor and a transmission that would pull to get turn signals, taillights, and all that, headlights. I guess they got those aftermarket kits to where you can just hook it up like on a relay box instead of having it on the multifunction switch. They put a brain box in it, and, you know, it's just got like a little key panel. You know, turn signal, headlight, horn, taillights, and headlights, you know. Everything but the windshield wipers. You know, we can hook that up with our our other wiring harness if we have to. You know, but it'll take splicing the wires in to make the headlights, taillights, and all that work. I would rather have that than the body control module. But we're going to definitely need some heat to defrost the windows and all that kind of jazz. You know, to hook up the AC and all that. You could actually put an aftermarket kit on it. You know, that's an option. It's a lot. It's a lot. I'll probably try to take that multifunction switch, chase the wires down, and hook it up off this factory steering column. It's a multifunction switch. You know, it'll work. It ain't just going to be something you can buy to plug up. Get some connectors or whatever, and, you know, if they're the same color, and that way you can kind of keep it color-coded. It ain't going to be nothing else somebody else could probably work on. You know, you're the one doing it or whatever. I'm going to keep this old truck as long as I can, so I'm dedicated. It's just going to be what it is, whatever it takes. And like I say, they got a strong aftermarket presence on these motors. You can buy a standalone wiring harness for the motor. You can buy ejector rails, bigger ejectors, PCM ready, plug and play with the harness or whatever. So, you know, if they got all that, you know, they're supporting these motors. And actually, you can have some big power. You know, if you had a 4L80, you wanted to take it up a next step, 4L80 with 500 horsepower rating, and, you know, if that was 300 or 400 horsepower for daydreaming, and it didn't have to have a turbo and get tuned and all that, you know, you might be able to just put a supercharger on it. There's plenty of room. Well, you know, if you didn't have to cut it all up, you don't want to cut into that windshield wiper box. You want to keep that to where it's sealed up real good. You know, I just cut it right below that windshield wiper box. We can slide it back a little bit, and then we'll figure it out from there. It's going to take a while. We're close. I'll get that dash out and get the motor bolted up and get the motor mounts on it. Once we do that, it'll be the process of getting the motor running. And, you know, you're going to have to hook up the exhaust. But if we can keep the brakes the way they are, you know, basically, I got that other little brake portioning valve. You know, I can just tap in and make that work and get rid of the ABS, get rid of all that crazy stuff. Just a manual style. Or you can buy a kit, probably. You buy a slave cylinder or whatever, and, you know, it won't be nothing. So, it's just a process of making it fit now. And one process we're going to have to do is cut that firewall out. I didn't want to do it. You could take a hammer, pull that motor back, smack it back with a hammer, make it fit, but you still got to get in there to get the bolts tight. You can loosen the transmission, slide it forward, slide it back. That's a lot. I could just cut that firewall. It's got to be done. I need the room, because when it pulls it back, it's going to be tight. And the fuel rails, or the fuel lines, they're stainless, they're already hitting. So, that's just the way we're going to have to do it. A little bit at a time. You know, like I say, pick at it one day at a time. Eventually you get it. Like I say, we might have to use all that factory stuff off that motor to make it start up and run good. And then, you know, an aftermarket intake and a shorter belt. That's not a big deal. We're going to have to put a manual steering rack on it. I leave that rack on there, just cut them lines and put one into the other. That way it's not going to vacuum lock or whatever when it sucks and blows, as far as trying to turn the wheel. Not a big deal. I used to take and just cut them lines and put a rubber hose on them and make a manual rack out of them for something. But you got to make sure it's drivable, you know, so it'll probably be a manual rack. We'll have to get a manual rack, shorter belt, and then see if we can hook up fuel lines to get it to start. We can get it to start. That's one thing that we didn't have. And those little transmission controllers, they're cheap. You know, is they going to make it last for a long time? You know, time will tell. You know, that old truck had 240,000 miles on it. So, you got to make it to where you can work on it. Let's just be honest. And then figure out what's what from there. You get it in there, you get it bolted up, you get everything hooked up, and be able to know how I can hook it up and take it back apart to work on it. I mean, you find a bunch of them old motors, you can pull that out, put a different motor in it if need be. I see guys finding old motors that's got like turbos or like a supercharger on it. You know, they're thinking tuning them up for like 400. That'd be nice. You know, I'd like to have something like that. You find one of them old Ecotech motors with like a turbo. Once you figure out how everything's hooked up, you could get one with like a supercharger, not a turbo, but a supercharger. Some of them do come with a factory turbo. You know, if you hog it out, just, you know, whatever, and make it work with some heat and some AC and power steering, that would be fun. But we're just trying to get it to where we can. I don't care about the AC. If I got to roll the windows down, it is what it is. Eventually you could put like I say, you could put one of those aftermarket deals on, but you know, the way the tightness is, you would have to put the AC and the power steering on this side of the motor to have room. You can't get it in there because of the steering rack, the steering arm. You know, we'll put a manual rack on it, and you know, no power steering, not a big deal, but no AC, you know, they do make those electric jobs, but I don't think they got them figured out 100% yet. We're going to take a break. I got to work on the motor puller so we can pull it back and all that, so we can, I have to pull it out here far enough so we can cut that firewall once we get all that pulled out. It'll take maybe a week or so. It shouldn't take that long, but it'll take 3-4 days at least to get the dash out and to get that cut and bolted up. Once you get it bolted up, you know, that'll be one step closer to making it, get it done. And like I say, I don't know if I want to weld all, you know, get everything hooked up till I can get a rack. You know, I would rather have a manual rack to go ahead and, you know, it's just going to be manual steering anyhow. You know, do that, and then to get, you know, you don't want to hook up fuel lines and all that kind of stuff until you can, you know, have that motor to where you can just unbolt it, slide it back out, put that rack in it, put it back together, put the motor bolted back up. Once you do that, you can start working on everything. But the dash has got to come out. We're going to leave the steering rack hooked up. And I might just go ahead and pull that AC box out and everything. I'd like to keep the heater hooked up. Like I say, I was going to try to take 2 wiring harnesses and make one, but I got to have room and then figure out all the plumbing and, you know, figure out this evap, whatever. If I got to take that old fuel tank and put it on with that evap box so everything can be hooked up. Extending wires and hook up the fans to that radiator. I'll probably use my factory radiator. And then these lines, they're like a quick connect, and they're a nightmare to get them in there tight. So we're going to switch those over to something different. You know, a soft line. That way, those factory lines will work with that transmission. But you can't get in there to work on that transmission lines. If you have a problem, you have to pull that motor out and slide it forward. And it's a lot. So we're going to have to do something with the transmission lines in order to get the radiator in it. I want that big radiator. It fits the hole good, and then you can just use something to make those fans stick up. But we're going to have to get a belt and a manual rack once we cut all that out. So if anybody wanted to donate to the project, you know, I need about $500, maybe $1,000. It's being a bum, I know. I don't have no way to get no t-shirts made up or stickers or whatever. So it's just enjoyment. But once you pull that motor back, it's going to be tight on the top. You know, to pull the motor, to do like some coil packs or whatever, if it goes to missing, that'd be a lot to do. Just saying, it would be a lot. I'll probably bend that tab up. Like to keep them factory brakes on there. I'll use all that stuff till it won't work. You know what I mean? So that's our game plan. We got a few people making comments or whatever. Feel free. You know, it's a free world. Say what you want. If I don't like hearing it, or it's just too vulgar or whatever, in my opinion, I'll block you. You know. But we got a long way to go and a short time to get there. So I'm gonna try to get this thing together. you know. And to figure out the wiring to make everything work and stuff like that, that's going to be a lot. It'd take a lot of reading and a lot of figuring, and I might need a Haynes manual for whatever, and a Haynes manual for the other one. But, and then, you know, I just want to get it to where I can drive it. Later.